Mr. DJ.
Hey, check this out. We got a great show coming your way.
From the ECSI Sports Studios, it's the Midday Market Report with Jeff Dawson.
Good afternoon, sports fans from all around the globe. I am the host, Jeff Dawson, East Coast Sports Investors, and this is your Midday Market Report for Wednesday, May 3rd, 2023, Kentucky Derby Week. Second round NBA NHL playoffs. MLB Daily Grind and the ECSI VIPs know the market has changed, and the books, the casinos, Vegas itself has said, ECSI, not so fast, and they've made it real hard for us to get in there and dig deep, but we're going to find some holes. We always do. But today is all about the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Ron, talking about last weekend's NFL draft, and let's just say the first round was full of fireworks. The fifth round, 11 quarterbacks, if I'm not mistaken, won the most trades ever in a draft. It was fireworks from the opening bell, basically. After Bryce Young was called out, then it began. Hats off to Kansas City and the Chiefs. They put on a hell of a show that weekend. But it's all about who did what. And as Ron and I both said backstage, it's work in progress now. If you jump to conclusions saying the Eagles won the draft, the Eagles not only are winning the NFC, they're going to go back to the Super Bowl, and their defense now is Georgia of the SEC. Oh, and they added DeAndre Swift, too, in the backfield. So Team Georgia again. So why play the games? Just start in the Super Bowl. We'll go from there. But anyways, let's bring him in. The true expert in the NFL and college football, Mr. Ron.
Good morning, Jeff.
Good afternoon, Ron.
How are you? Almost time to sleep. You know, it's been a lot of days grinding out some information, but certainly is a fun period of year. We're about 2 weeks away from putting the NFL on the back burner, but the next couple of weeks going to be exciting as I really dig into what I think about each team.
Shout out to Connor, Andrew McGinnis, Mr. Billy Hewlin, all here to listen, to see your breakdown, your thoughts of this draft. I'd like to say, we're in May. Hopefully we'll circle back the wagons throughout the late spring and summer as we get closer to open and kick. A lot of people watching and listening tonight, this afternoon, actually, want to hear your thoughts. I mean, obviously, I'm going to start at the top. Bryce Young, an absolute no-brainer. Everyone knew finally that was going to be the pick. Now, most people then said Stroud. Now, Reddit and whoever Will Levis said to put that tweet out, he was potentially going to be the second quarterback off. A lot of people had Willie Anderson, the third pick. Take us through 2 and 3, what the Texans actually did, and your thoughts. Was a lot of people applauded and a lot of people scratched their head.
First of all, thanks to everybody who's there in the chat and listening. Appreciate that. Houston made, I believe, 8 trades in the draft. So they certainly wheeled and dealed, and they gave up a lot of draft capital throughout this draft and last year and next year's draft. But what I like is they went backwards from what I thought. I thought they were honing in on Will Anderson. They took Stroud first, thinking that they could get an easier deal and take some teams off the table. If they took Stroud first, then Arizona wouldn't be in play for that quarterback. And then they go back to Will Anderson. I think DeMeco Ryans has already had, as a head coach there, an influence on their draft approach. Instead of reaching like they did for Sauce Gardner last year, or for not taking Sauce Gardner, but taking Derek Stingley, They took the safe guy, the reliable, what we think is going to be a 7-10 year starter in Will Anderson. I applaud that. I personally would have only taken 2 quarterbacks in the first round, and Stroud would have been the second. So I'm happy for that. And then we move on. It's Arizona, and Arizona knows that it wants to trade back, get more draft capital. If we delve deeper into Arizona, this isn't about 2023 for Arizona. They know they're nowhere close to being a playoff team right now. This is about 2024, amazing draft capital, building your offensive line with Paris Johnson. And that's exactly what they did, from 3 to 12 back up to 6. That's where we were with the first 3, 4, 5, 6 picks.
Now, a few of us in the chat, and I was one of them as well. I thought Wilson, some piece of talent, him and Jalen Carter in the draft, and we were an M guy. Was it Wilson?
Yeah, Texas A&M's Wilson.
Scrolling down. Yes,
with the Raiders.
Who ended up going to the Raiders there. Yes. So in your mind, what Texans did, they got the quarterback, and the number 3 pick in your mind, Willie Anderson, was the play there?
Yes, absolutely. Not only for financial reasons, but for some of us, but also for the fact that he's the safest pick. Wilson has perhaps a slighter upside wow factor, but there is a floor that's not, it's not as high in terms of Will Anderson. You expect him to be a 7 to 10 year starter. Wilson scares me a little bit. One very good year of production, a lot of athletic measurables, but I like to go back to the tape, and I saw 1 year's worth of tape. I want to see more for a top 3 pick, even for a top 7 pick. I realize there's not 7 marquee players in this draft, so we can't treat it like last year when we had a full board of 31, 32 first round talents. This year I had 22 to 24 legit first round talents. So I understand why he went to 7 to the Raiders. I'm comfortable with that, paired up to Max Crosby. So it works for me.
All right, the 4th pick, the Colts, and the whole world, they told us through their moles or spies or whatever, Levis was the pick. The whole world know that, and great poker face. Great job. Great job, Colts. Anthony Richardson the whole time. Thoughts? We knew they needed a quarterback. We know next year's quarterback stable is was supposed to be a lot better than this year's stable. What are your thoughts with them taking Richardson? We know they needed a quarterback. Obviously, that was their guy. If they wanted him, that was the only spot that they were going to get him. Did you see this coming?
With Indy, I thought it was between 3 guys. I thought if Stroud dropped, they would have to reevaluate him, who they probably didn't evaluate. I honestly wasn't sure where Indy would go with this pick. This is obviously a swing for the fences. Richardson is so athletic. He's going to elude sacks. If he has to play in his first year, the stat line is going to look like Justin Fields' first year stat line. He's going to have an 8 out of 21 game with 38 yards passing and 77 yards rushing. You're just going to have to live with that. But today's football is about elusive quarterbacks. I think Indy's O-line will benefit by not having to protect in the pocket as much with a quarterback like Richardson. He's got a lot of things to iron out. Check with all of us in 4 years whether this works out, because this could be a colossal bust, or it could be, again, just like Cam Newton was for me a dozen years ago or so, bigger, stronger, faster, the new wave of quarterbacks. Anthony Richardson might be that next new wave of quarterback, or we may return back to that pocket quarterback. The game is cyclical. I wouldn't have done it, but it's an organization that can support him because they have at least the foundation of an offensive line and kind of a track record of getting a lot of depth on their team. They had 11 or so draft choices, and they had a lot of good draft choices this year. A lot of parts filled on the roster. So this is hardly a bottom feeder team in a division that's ripe for the taking. My only wish for Indianapolis is that they don't have to play him this year, except for using him, I'd say perhaps like Trey Lance type sub packages. Get him in the game, get his feet wet like Trey Lance did with some run pass options, 4 or 5 plays a game. But please wait on him for at least a year.
Because that was my next question. Do you think he'll be playing? I guess Irsay's hinting that he's playing. They have Jonathan Taylor. They have Michael Pittman. As Russell says, he must play. You can rush him in, and there is the ghosts of Sam Darnold, and I'm not comparing them to Sam Darnold, but there's been a lot of quarterbacks rushed into play that have never recovered. There's been a handful that have succeeded right away, but in the long term, your thoughts? Could this be a ease him in, like you said, maybe with some sub packages, and then maybe by week 8, 9, or 10, he might be ready to pass the torch?
He's very young, not only chronologically, but in terms of reading defenses. He cannot read defenses. His Florida team, which has a lot of guys drafted to the NFL and a lot of undrafted free agents, because they're a little bit of an undisciplined SEC team, completely opposite of what you find at Georgia and Alabama, where they all know they're so assignment sound in those areas. So there's a lot of Florida guys who were thought to have NFL talent. Richardson, with 13 starts under his belt, I understand the push, especially if they're 3-5 after week 8 and all the fan base says, put him in, get his feet wet. I still wouldn't do it. I want a master plan. I don't care about this year if they're 3-5. I care about the future.
The last 2 weeks leading up to the draft, you and I talked about the next 2 picks. And for me, Witherspoon was linked to the Lions. They were sitting at 6, Seattle at 5. And we asked ourselves this: if Jalen Carter's available, will Pete move in? Surprised that he said, we're putting the Legion of Boom back together from the back forward. And they went after Witherspoon.
Okay, so on the one part, I'm not surprised at Witherspoon being considered for top 5. He was 12-1 at one point to be a top 5 pick, which I thank the books for offering that. But the other thing is he was so locked into Detroit, it made some sense. I didn't have him on Seattle's radar screen. I completely applaud the pick. I'm not a Jalen Carter fan. I think he has to be in the right system. It turns out Philly's the right system, and we can explain that when we get to Philly as to why I think that's the right system. But this is a strike gold myth again for Pete Carroll and John Schneider, because you need 3. This league is about 2 linebackers and 5 cornerbacks, 5 defensive backs this year. I mean, a lot of people play a 4-2-5, a 3-3-5. Or you have that hybrid safety linebacker. It's just incredible how many cornerbacks can be on the field at the same time, and you can never have enough. And so this was a home run for Pete Carroll, in my opinion.
But now the Lions are sitting there, their jaws dropped. They're like, shit, Witherspoon's gone. Now what? Good move on their part to say, call Arizona back up, or what? Did you see this coming, or did you pivot, or what happens here?
It's not that I didn't see it coming. It's that Detroit didn't see it coming. And they were one of 3 teams in this draft. This is the first. The Jets were the second, and Dallas were the third. Those 3 teams were blindsided in round 1 of the draft. And Detroit, especially the Jets, they stayed on the clock a long time. I believe Arizona initiated the move for Paris Johnson. Everybody knew in draft circles that they wanted Paris Johnson. And obviously with Chicago sitting at 9 and Philly sitting at 10, if they didn't go for Jalen Carter, or if somebody else went for him beforehand, they had to get to 7 or sooner to get there. So it was a natural point for Detroit, who thought they were getting Witherspoon at 6. and thought they were getting Gibbs ahead of Tampa at 18. It was a natural point for Detroit to say, okay, we're going to go back to 12, and we're very confident that nobody will know we want Gibbs at 12. So that's what they did to sacrifice at least some face at that particular point. The problem I have with Detroit is if you really wanted Gibbs, why didn't you take Bijan Robinson at 6? Because on most draft boards, not all, Robinson was the guy that was ahead of Gibbs. What's the difference between taking Robinson at 6 and Gibbs at 12? I think Detroit just got blindsided.
That's a hell of a point there, Ron. That's why you are here. That is a hell of a point there. In my eyes, great pick by the Raiders. In my 10 that I sent, I had Stroud sliding, and then they were going to get stuck with, oh my God, Stroud's still here. Well, we got a fragile Jimmy G, who we don't know how long he's going to be here. That would have been the obvious play here. Tyree Wilson sitting there, I thought in my mind, an absolute no-brainer for them at this spot.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's good for the pass rush. It puts less pressure on the secondary that needs to be rebuilt because of failed draft choices in the last few years. So no problem with the Raiders at all.
Now the fun. Falcons have done it before. They did it with Mr. Pitts. They did it with London. Everyone said the hint, wink, wink. They were linked to him. Obviously, great year by Algier. They still had Cordarrelle Patterson. Was it that easy for them to pull the trigger here with all their defensive woes and their offensive line and all the other holes? I mean, was it that simple?
For them, it was because Arthur Smith comes from Derrick Henry in Tennessee, so he's used to running the ball. Atlanta did not want to use the forward pass last year. They didn't trust Marcus Mariota. They're not going to trust a young Desmond Ridder. You saw what they did with the run game without Bijan Robinson. Running back doesn't move the win needle. That's my biggest problem with this. It does shorten the game when you have. I think Robinson's a top 10 talent, and I think he fits with Atlanta maybe more than most teams. I understand it. But I'm telling you, if they continue to have an aversion to drafting edge rushers and getting after the quarterback, it's not going to matter who runs the ball. They're always going to be behind, or they're going to give up a late lead late in the game. But I understand what they were doing. I just wish that they would have been proactive and going after. There's an edge rusher out there from Jacksonville that they could still add. I can't pronounce his name, so I'm not going to try. So he's out there. He's played with the Raiders. He's played with Jacksonville and so on. And they should have added more edge rushers in this draft before, during, and after the draft. That's my biggest problem with them. But Bijan Robinson is a quality back.
So at 9, the Eagles are just sitting there. They're like, OMG, OMG. Jalen Carter slides. Now the off the field issues is one thing. Some people didn't even have him on their board. Now you got the NFC champs. You have the Super Bowl runner-up. This guy, Team Georgia, whatever you want to say, this, as you said earlier, fits their scheme. They had to be doing cartwheels as soon as Atlanta said Bijan Robinson. I'm surprised the card didn't come in 10 seconds later. This is like for them a no-brainer, correct?
Oh yeah, I thought Philly. I wasn't the only one who thought Philly had their eye on Jalen Carter. I thought they'd trade to 10, from 10 to 7 to get to go up and get it at Vegas. I thought there was a chance they'd go to 8 and a chance they'd go to 9 to get Carter. So I understand the move. And the reason why I think he fits their scheme is because Howie Roseman has forever rotated his front 7. He can't get enough bodies on the front 7. They do not play 40, they play 50, 60% of the time, and they rotate them in and out. Now, I know they lost half that group or close to half that group to free agency and so on. They couldn't keep them all. They knew they couldn't keep them all. But that's why they drafted last year Davis. That's why they drafted Dean at linebacker. That's why they drafted 2 more people, as it turns out, from the University of Georgia, all 4 of them. but 4 people to the front 7. They don't expect Carter to play more than 35 snaps a game. And frankly, Carter doesn't give himself or put himself in good enough shape to play more than 35 snaps a game. Most teams, if I were the GM, he wouldn't have been on my board. I don't want him. If he's suspended, he's no help to my team. If he has a work ethic that's not that good, if he doesn't love football like some people have said, I don't want him on my team. Philly's the closest to where I said, yeah, I would give him a first round grade. I hope it works out for them. Everybody might say, let's say he becomes an all pro and he becomes this Warren Sapp type person. Everybody's going to say, every draft person's going to say, look at all the teams that should have drafted him. And I'm going to say, if they would have drafted him, it wouldn't have worked out the same way. It's just each team's team fit is different. It can work here. I don't think it would have worked in several other places.
And in the 30th pick, another guy that slid, Nolan Smith, kept sliding. So they add another Georgia guy there. And then they trade for DeAndre Swift, where, again, the Lions, Jamal Williams left the building. They were getting tired of the Swift's a great talent. He just can't stay healthy. They added the Bears back. Why am I drawing a blank on the Bears back here? David Montgomery. So they'll have the back of Gibbs and Montgomery. So there are the SEC of the Team Philly, the NFC East. It's going to be interesting. On paper, Ron, a lot of people said that the Eagles won the draft. They won the first round. Do you concur?
I think they're right up there. I think they're top 5, but I will put in one little note, and I'm curious what your thoughts are and what anybody who listens or watches this thoughts are. Georgia obviously has an assignment sound, unbelievable defense. In this day and age in college football, to give up not that much more than 10 points a game is just simply amazing. My problem is all these guys get drafted. You're talking about the entire front 7 practically and a bunch of defensive backs as well, in addition to offensive players. If they're on another team, do they complement each other because they're so good? They're good enough that they have so much good talent that it's just an embarrassment of riches. What happens when they go to the NFL? Like the Clemson defensive linemen, for example, over time, they haven't panned out as much as we thought. The Ohio State quarterbacks haven't panned out as much as we thought. Is it a coincidence? This is something I'm going to be watching. Georgia sent a lot of people to the NFL. I wonder if some of them were sent because they just had a lot of help around them, and maybe by themselves they weren't worthy of that first or second round pick. It's just a question out there.
No, I love the thought, and the go back, a dozen years ago, maybe, when Clemson was at the top or near the top, knocking on the door defensively and obviously offensively with Watson, with Trevor Lawrence. It's always been Alabama. And now the tide has changed, no pun intended there, with the reemergence of Georgia, 2-time defending champs and odds-on favorite. When you look at their schedule next year, their first test is like week 11 at Tennessee. And is it the NFL now just riding the wave? It's Georgia, Alabama, Georgia, Alabama.
Yeah, no, it's apologize for the sound in the background, but boy, phone's blowing off the hook. Maybe a trade deal or something like that. But yeah, it's a lot of people are making. I said this in my pre-draft report that Philly, by all intent and purposes, was going to make this a big school draft. And that's exactly what they've done. They're making this a big school draft. And some people are just more inclined, hey, if the SEC has these people, they're already 4 and 5 stars from high school and so on. They're developed by all these great coaches in the SEC. That's where we want to be. We don't want to take a chance on a stereotype slower person from the Midwest or somebody from the Pac-12 where they haven't even gone to the championship playoffs for a while. it's a stereotype out there that's just the way it is.
Back to the top 10, the Bears. And again, the Bears take Darnell Wright, offensive tackle from Tennessee. I had them taking the Northwestern offensive tackle with Skoronowski. You like the right pick there? Or was it the right pick?
Yeah. I think they just decided by taking Wright, they decided they wanted tackle. And Skoronski is so versatile. He could play anywhere on the line. He could be a starter at offensive tackle. He could be an all-pro at offensive guard. I'm okay with it because the Bears decided to go for upside at tackle, sacrificing guard. And the Bears need everything anyway along the offensive line. Their sack ratio was so skewed that they have to do something multiple times on the offensive line, even though they drafted 4 last year. But we know now, or I thought 3 of them shouldn't have been drafted. So I'm okay with it because they decided this was the better tackle.
Now the next, we'll go 10 to 20. Titans take the Northwestern offensive tackle, Skoronski. The Lions obviously shake up the whole draft there with Gibbs. You and I talked backstage. I thought that was going to be Christian Gonzalez, the cornerback, but I'll let you get back to that. Packers with a linebacker, Lucas Van Ness. The Steelers, Broderick Jones from Georgia. The Jets with Will McDonald, edge rusher, Iowa State. Anything surprise you there, 10 to 15?
Well, welcome back, Pittsburgh, who's always had a good focus, but hasn't always correctly identified the best players. 4 offensive linemen were in my top 15 grades. The 4th one was Broderick Jones. Broderick Jones is sitting there. New England says, hey, we don't want to do the Jets any favors. Let's trade back. The Jets, it's a consequence of, I think, what we talked about last week, kind of a hidden thing about when Green Bay moved to 13 and the Jets, they insisted they wanted to go to 13. So they flipped spots with the Jets. That cost the Jets the offensive tackle that they sorely needed because that's a weak link in their team, the offensive line. Pittsburgh, realizing that they could get a cornerback later, they didn't know which one at the time, but instead of going cornerback at 17, knowing they had the 32nd pick in the draft, the very top of the second round, the way the cornerback room was shaping up with Gonzalez not even off the board yet, they knew they could get a cornerback later, but they knew also that they couldn't get a marquee offensive tackle unless they traded up. Beautiful move, blindsided the Jets. The Jets were on the clock for 9 minutes out of their 10. They didn't quite know what to do, and they took a second-round edge rusher, who's not a bad player, but they took a second-round talent, and they drafted him in the first round. So those are my 2 takeaways.
And back east here, the Patriots were basically, sticking their chest out because they knew they were sticking it to the Jets because they knew exactly where Pittsburgh was going and where the Jets wanted to go. Commanders at 16, cornerback Emmanuel Forbes from Mississippi State. The Patriots, listen, an absolute no-brainer. They trade back there. At 17, they're sitting there. It almost reminds me of a couple of years ago when they're just sitting there and Mac Jones fell to them. Micah Parsons was a few picks before that Dallas took. That was their guy. Then here comes Mac Jones, falls in the silver platter to him. The same thing with the Patriots with Christian Gonzalez, Oregon cornerback, absolute no-brainer there for them. The Lions at 18, Jack Campbell, linebacker, Iowa. Tampa Bay, Kalijah Kancey from Pittsburgh. And at 20th, the Seahawks back in the first round, taking Jigba, wide receiver, Ohio State, the first wide receiver off the board.
Okay, a lot of thoughts there. First of all, if New England kind of doesn't fall in love with any one player, if they really love Gonzalez, they would have taken him at 14 because by all accounts, if you believe the media and the draft experts on TV, he was a draft faller at that time at 14. Personally, I think he was properly slotted in the 14 to 20 range. I didn't think he really was a top 10 talent at cornerback, so that's fine. But they just waited for the board, in my opinion. You go to 20, Seattle, excellent pickup. They were the drop off after Lockett and Metcalf was steep. Metcalf may not be on the team more than a year or two. There's been some rumblings. If they can keep all three, it's unbelievable. If they don't, they have their replacement. So that worked out pretty well. Washington was pretty low in takeaways last year, so they go after the draft riser in the cornerback. I had him fifth best, Forbes, but a first round talent. I had him lower first round, but the guy had a numerous number of interceptions. So I understand they wanted a ball hawk, and maybe because they have such a good front seven, it's a good fit for them because the front seven creates so much pressure on opposing quarterbacks that a ball hawk guy like Forbes can make a difference in Washington. So those are pretty much, I think, my thoughts there. I like, it's kind of hidden. Kancey hasn't been talked about much for Tampa, but I have a feeling he has some real potential.
Now the fun begins. The last 10 or 12 picks after Seattle takes the wide receiver from Ohio State. Here come the wide receivers, Chargers, Quentin Johnson. I think the Ravens got, it's not the team that drafts you, it's the situation. And Zay Flowers to the Ravens, in my eyes, is a home run. I think he's going to do there. And then this surprised me, Minnesota taking Jordan Addison from USC. So they add a wide receiver. Giants come back with Deontay Banks, another cornerback from Maryland. And then Buffalo at 25, the first tight end off the board with Dalton Kincaid.
Numerous thoughts here, and we'll have a little exchange here because I have some disagreements in terms of the wide receivers. And I had to go back. This is important to me. Person-team fit is incredibly important. I had Zay Flowers. I loved Zay Flowers. And I had him rated the second best wide receiver in the draft. And even though I love Zay Flowers, I will probably downgrade him after this.
Okay.
I like Todd Monken, and I think that I've got to watch him carefully because he can create things that Baltimore's never done before. Zay Flowers is a little bit wasted with the Lamar Jackson because Lamar Jackson likes to throw to the bigger targets, the Andrews, the tight end, and they also throw the ball maybe 27 times a game in a perfect world. They don't throw the ball all over the field. They throw to establish the run, if you will, because that's their bread and butter. So Zay Flowers is not going to be utilized as much as Jordan Addison, who I have to move up because he instantly becomes the number 2 receiver on Minnesota. And the number 1 receiver is going to be double teamed all the time. So Addison's going to get a number of looks, and he had a great year at Pittsburgh. You can't forget what he did in 2021. He was fine in 2022. He just didn't see the field enough. So all of a sudden, his stock is elevated. I certainly wish the Chargers would have broken from tradition for the first time in their life. First of all, nobody trades with them anymore. It's lose my number because 6 of the last 8 years, the Chargers haven't traded. We had 43 trades in the draft. The Chargers didn't even use a phone in the draft room. That's my opinion. So they sit there and they draft Quentin Johnson. Fits their scheme perfectly, but I wish that they would have gone outside their scheme. And then let's talk about one more, the Buffalo move. Buffalo needed to have Banks, and they went up and got him. Cornerback was a huge hole for the New York Giants. Let me take that back. Buffalo leapfrogged Dallas, right, to get Kincaid. And Dallas telegraphed their pick is what happened. And Buffalo said so in the media. And then Jerry Jones used some not PG rated words to explain things. And then they went radio silent for a while because Dallas did what Dallas always does. Everybody knows what they're doing, and Buffalo moved up for him. But the move I like better than that was the Giants moving up for Banks because cornerback was a severe need, and they knew what they wanted, and they got it.
Now, I'm a little froggy here. Wasn't it Jacksonville that kept moving down that created the move? Yes. Okay. And yeah. So we all knew Dallas needed a tight end. Schultz has left the building. We know how Dak is. With none of them gone, I mean, you got caught with your pants down. Kincaid, obviously, great move by Buffalo. But here now, we talked about this backstage, and this still stuns me here. They take Mazi Smith from Michigan, and the story that I heard was that was Parsons' guy. He was talking to whoever the coaches were. In all, whatever you do, if possible, this is the guy that we want. This is the guy that we need. My question is, they compared the Notre Dame tight end to Jason Witten. So I don't know enough about Mr. Smith here. I'm not here to belittle him. Was getting caught with your pants down, Kincaid is gone. Would you have taken the Notre Dame tight end there, or did they make the right move there?
Well, I'm kind of surprised because I profiled Dallas to want Mayer more than Kincaid, and it didn't turn out to be the case. So that really surprised me. They had two people in mind. They had the Syracuse offensive tackle in mind, Bergeron, and they had Mazi Smith in mind. They didn't even consider Mayer for this pick. So I admit, I, like many other people, were surprised because I profiled Mayer to this area. I think Mazi Smith is a good two-down back. A lot of people think he can stay on the field in a third down because he has some maneuverability. Some of the other defensive tackles don't move at all. So that'll be an interesting thing to watch. I think he will upgrade their roster, but to be honest, I had Mayer with a grade anywhere from like 24 to 30, and I had Mazi Smith with a grade in the 35 to 40, 42 range. So Mayer was higher on my board.
27, Jacksonville, after a couple maneuvers, finally picks Anton Harrison, offensive tackle from Oklahoma. The Bengals come up with Miles Murphy, edge rusher from Clemson. The Saints, Byron Breesy, defensive tackle from Clemson. Eagles, we talked about edge rusher Nolan Smith from Georgia. And Kansas City Chiefs take Felix Uzama, edge rusher, Kansas State.
So the two I would talk about here, Murphy to Cincinnati is interesting. I really didn't know where Cincinnati would go without, because Mayer wasn't their guy. Kincaid is more of a Cincinnati profile to me. And I thought he was in the running, and maybe Gibbs would be in the running. So with those guys gone, I understand the defense. And since his sack ratio was kind of skewed, you don't see a high-level, almost Super Bowl team with their kind of sack ratio. So I kind of like the move. I know Murphy is from that Clemson team, and Clemson hasn't quite done enough, but to prepare people for whatever reason. But I think Murphy could be a hit with this team. So I do like that one. And the Breezy pick with New Orleans is interesting too. Sad and wonderful backstory for him. Lost his sister, I think. It's another Clemson guy, actually. But New Orleans, the last couple of years, their rock-solid run defense started to erode a little bit, and I think they wanted to firm that up. Dennis Allen, the coach, is more of a defensive guy. I wish he was more of an offensive guy, but he's not. But I think it was a sensible move. Surprised me that New Orleans didn't trade up. They're so used to doing that. They did trade up later. So get this, Jeff. That's 25 in a row trade up. No trade downs for New Orleans.
First round's complete. You're sitting home Thursday night. You're 3 hours behind me, so you got a couple extra hours to take everything in. You take a look at the first round, you start making your notes, and you're getting ready for Friday, the next two rounds, second and third. Take us through the process. Take us through what you do after the first round, how you took in the second and third round, and what happened and transpired that might have shocked you, stunned you, as we talked about.
Well, mostly because I only had 22 people in my first round, about 18 or 19 went. So there weren't that many left. And they went pretty fast. Porter went, Meyer went, and so on and so forth. So most of them went. I'm up pretty late on Thursday night because if you saw on my Twitter feed, I put out that, and I think I just posted it on Twitter, just my round one bullet point reflections. So if you go back to that, maybe I'll pin it at the top, just so the round one reflections. And I just go through what I thought after the first round. But then I'm on to round two, and I put out the whole report that is still available out there, where I matched up what I thought would happen in round 2 and 3. And then I continue to go through, and as I told you backstage, this is a work in progress. There are no grades of mine right now. I kind of know who did well. I kind of know who did poorly. But I want to say this to anybody who's grading the draft or thinks they did well, a team did well or did poorly. Make sure you understand that traded draft picks are a part of the process. Jeff Okuda of the Lions cost the Lions a draft pick. I have to downgrade the Lions a little bit because Okuda's not on the team. I have to downgrade Carolina a little bit because McCaffrey's not on the team. Conversely, a guy like tight end Waller, who left the Vegas and he's now with the New York Giants, the Giants, that's a draft pick for me for the New York Giants. So the Giants get elevated because Waller is like having a draft pick. McCaffrey is like having a draft pick for the 49ers. Brandon Cooks is like having a draft pick for the Dallas Cowboys. Jalen Ramsey, it's a 4-player draft from Miami. He's like a draft pick for Miami. So the puzzle isn't complete. I do all of that. Then after all that's done, I need to see what areas they still are not, they still have needs in and why they didn't pick those people. And that's when I will make my complete assessment of the team. We're 2 weeks away from me making my complete assessment. And I there's no need to rush. The season isn't starting tomorrow. So I want to get all my ducks in a row. I want to know everything that there is possibly to know about a team before we see those season win totals come out by more than a couple of places. By May 20th, I should have everything in line, and then I can put the NFL to bed for 3 months. But I have work to do still. Believe it or not, even though I feel like I'm knowledgeable in the draft, I have work to do still.
And we talked about stunners, anything that whether it was in the first round or on Friday or even Saturday. You talked about the 47 trades. I talked about the 11 quarterbacks in round 5. Maybe it's a team that you were surprised didn't do enough, which you said, again, work in progress. We got work still left to do here. But overall, your assessment of what took place Thursday, Friday, and Saturday.
Well, there's some teams that did each year. There's some teams that surprised me. Like last year, the Jets did not have a history of great drafts. The Giants did not have a history of great drafts. Seattle had a history of off-the-wall drafts. Each one of those teams, I thought, killed it last year, and everybody else thought the Jets did as well. All 3 of those teams improved. Now, that was a deep draft. We don't know if that'll translate, but there are teams that surprise me. So Pittsburgh surprised me, for example, with a formful draft. Seattle surprised me because they went back-to-back conventional drafts and did it the right way. Jacksonville didn't surprise me. I apologized to them after my week 1 note saying, hey, they traded back, they got these extra picks. And then the picks they got, understandably, they filled in their roster beautifully. But I haven't finished all the work, but right now I see a whole bunch of mistakes that Jacksonville made in the draft. And unfortunately, I'm not a fan of that GM, and he's probably not a fan of me. So we're not going to have a beer together, dark beer or otherwise. I think he's one of the worst GMs in the business. Now, Jacksonville has the best quarterback in the AFC South. They probably have the best coach in the AFC South. They're probably legit to win the AFC South, but they could have done a lot more. So that didn't surprise me. Some of the moves Denver made, I'm going to be higher on than most people, for example. Looking at some of the other teams may have went sideways. Minnesota, to me, went sideways, trading for no good reason or something like that. The Chargers disappointed me a little bit, but no major surprise. I guess the one surprise I would say to all my Detroit Lion fans is you may have made the worst trade in the draft, You traded 3 fairly decent picks in the middle of the rounds to move up for what I think might be a 6th, 7th, or undrafted guy in the 3rd round, a defensive tackle. I'll do more due diligence on him, but I really don't like that trade. That was probably the stunning trade I didn't like.
As we wrap up here, Ron, I talked to you. You know, D Hop still a big missing piece. Who gets him? He's been linked to Kansas City, Buffalo, potentially the Jets, and they added Cobb today. So unless they're going to pile on there, I don't see D Hop going there. The move that the Lions made, bringing Swift over to Philly now. They moved on from Miles Sanders. Assess that move. I mean, again, when healthy, he's great. He just can't stay in the field. As a fantasy guy, there was a tweet out there that I applauded. He goes, the big winner today was Kenneth Gainwell, meaning Swift's not going to stay on the field long enough anyways. There's no Miles Sanders, so it'll be Gainwell. So.
I'm not sure Philly's done with the running back room because Philly's never done. They drafted or they signed a cornerback and they traded for somebody in May and August of last year. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson was added and another secondary player was added as well. So basically that area needed help, didn't get it in the draft, and they got it after the draft. Philly knows how to work everything. I thought Detroit unleashed how you use Swift the last 10 games of the year by compromising his carries, keeping him on the field, maybe 10 touches a game. And that way you get the most out of him because he is a smooth pass catcher and he runs for an efficient yards per carry. And Philly, we just talked about how they rotate the defensive line. Even with Miles Sanders, even in the Super Bowl, he got so few touches in the first half of that game. Basically, they like to rotate and keep fresh running backs going, even Boston Scott. So adding Swift is just an extension of how they're going to use him. 5-6 touches a game on the ground, 3-4 touches a game in the air. Good move for Philly. And unfortunately for the Lions, they got nothing in return for him, just an exchange of 7th round picks because their hand was, everybody saw what their hand was after they drafted Gibbs. So he was on the cheap. But I think a good move for Philly. But fantasy-wise, I don't know that you could trust any Philly. I don't do fantasy, but fantasy-wise, I don't know how you could trust Philly. Any Philly running back, it's going to be the hot hand.
100%. The crawler's been going the whole time, Ron. Everyone here watches and listens to you, knows they can follow you on Twitter at Ron A Sports. But what we like to do is throw you a nice little 5-yard button hook and give you the final thoughts and the stage where they can find all your work.
Well, I'm drawing Las Vegas Chris out of the woodwork. I'm putting him to work. Chris and I will be back next week, and we'll talk the draft. But we're going to probably talk in relationship to how it changes the futures market. So we're going to get Chris back into football next week, and we're going to quiz him. And we'll probably spend 80 minutes on the Detroit Lions and 5 minutes on the rest of the show. But hopefully we can move that around a little bit. The Lions are fascinating. We could run a whole show on the Lions, but we'll do that. And the other key point to keep in mind, and this is when we'll probably reconnect, is after that schedule comes out, because that's a very big piece of my puzzle. It's the last piece of my puzzle. And I write 8 pages. So if you follow me and when the schedule comes out, you'll see an 8-page report on the NFL schedule, team by team. And I think it's one of the things that I do the best is look at how the schedule impacts each team and what it goes through. So that's why, this whole thing is the pieces of the puzzle are starting to come together. We got a large piece with the draft, but the missing pieces are about a week away.
Well, we can't wait. My DM's always open. My phone, whatever you need, send smoke signals. We'll make sure when it's time and ready, we will get you back on. It's always a pleasure from here. to talk football. It's the one sport that never ends. 365, there's always something. So we thank you again, as always, Ron.
Thanks for having me. Have a great week.
You too. The one and only Mr. Ron at Ron A Sports. Go follow him. Check all his work. He'll be back in the near future to break down the 8-page report. Once the schedule's out, we'll start to bring some gambling aspects, some numbers. Superbooks already got some under-overs. They got the futures market. So we'll coordinate everything there. Go follow myself at EC Sports Invest. Shout out, huge following today. TJ, Mr. Sailor, Mr. Bill, Andrew McGinnis. Big crowds here today. Connor, we can't thank you guys enough. Coming up probably in around 15, 20 minutes. Riley with the closing bell. I'm going to try to dive on myself. If I don't, I'll be back at 6 o'clock with Brady Cannon talking Quail Hollow, as we're 3 weeks away from PGA's second major. So thank everyone. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon, and we'll see you soon.